Hey everybody, Paul Abernathy here. Welcome to another mobile Let's Ask Paul. If you're not familiar with me, my name is Paul Abernathy. I'm CEO and founder of Electrical Code Academy Incorporated. And I also own other companies as well, like Electrician Pride. If you want any good swag, some neat hats and shirts and t-shirts and stickers and dude, we even have shoes, believe it or not. To show your pride as an electrician, I'm hoping you all are proud as you can be to be in this trade. This is an amazing trade. Hopefully you share it with everybody and, make those other trades feel inferior. That's what I'm talking about because, being an electrician is where it's at. So I had a question that was submitted to me and said, Paul, in one of your, and this was actually specific, it asked about doing it in a mobile podcast, which is different because usually I do normal podcasts. Lately, I've been a little lax on that, so I promise you I'll get back at it. Been really, really busy. But I asked, Paul, can you talk a little bit about tray cable and some of its uses? And that's basically the gist of the question. I was like, sure, not a problem at all. Now, tray cable, if you're not familiar with it, maybe you're purely a residential electrician and you're not familiar with tray cable, which is typically used in commercial applications, industrial applications. But for those that are residential, it basically looks just like SER, right? The gray SER you're familiar with that you use all the time for remote distribution panels, going from, again, one panel to another. Or, SER could even be used for things like ranges and dryers and all. It comes in various sizes. But you're probably familiar with that. Now, tray cable is in the NEC, that's the National Electrical Code, is covered under Article 336. Now, it is a non-metallic product. It's very similar to like a non-metallic sheath cable. But its construction can be different. It is constructed, and thickness of sheathing and all this stuff is pretty much governed by the UL standard 1277, okay? And so a little different because non-metallic is covered under 719, but this is 1277. So it has its own construction requirements. And one of the things about the standard is that tray cable has to be round-ish. Okay, now that's a term that people throw around a lot because you can use tray cable for hazardous classified locations like Class 1 Division 2, Class 2 Division 2, and there's certain applications where you can use tray cable, but you have to use it with specific fittings and you got to make sure it seals and all that. And we're not going to go into that because that's kind of more visual. And maybe I am going to do some more videos. People have been asking for some videos on hazardous locations, so maybe I'll try to get that worked into our schedule, our video schedule. And it will be available on Fast Tracks Tube when that happens. But so tray cable looks very much like just a standard non-metallic sheath cable. The sheathing is typically black, but it could be any color. And it's usually at least 60 mils thickness, so it's much thicker. So typical SE cable, the gray stuff that the Resi guys, y'all are familiar with, that's typically 30 mils of sheathing, which is not insulation, so that's just protective sheathing. That's usually 30 mils, but tray cable is typically going to be start at about 60 mils, and obviously the bigger it gets, the sheathing will get thicker, right? It's all driven by the standard, which is 1277. Now, the inner conductors, because people ask these questions all the time, the inner conductors that are inside of tray cable are the exact same type inner conductors, like THHN, THWN-2, XHN. It's the same conductors that you would pull in a raceway, right? No different. Same type of conductors. So a lot of people get confused with that. Is it something special? It's typically not. It's the same type of insulated conductors that you would find inside of it that you would pull individually in a raceway. Okay. Now, some of the other things about tray cable is there's really, and we try to identify it this way. People ask, well, if it's like SER, where can you install it like SER? So traditional tray cable, the answer to that is no, you can't. If you go look at the permitted uses, and folks, y'all know that .10 is permitted uses and .12 is not permitted uses in the NEC. That's very common for cables and in applications. You'll notice that it says, and I'll kind of stick to the main ones, it says that it's permitted to run it in a raceway. Of course, if it's a complete raceway, then of course you got to do a raceway fill and treat it as a single conductor, so it can't exceed 53%. Y'all all know that, Chapter 9, Table 1, Note 9. Y'all get it, right? But if it's just leaving it for physical protection, then you got Note 2 of Chapter 9, Table 1, and then you don't have to worry about the fill requirement. Totally different topic. But you can obviously run tray cable inside of a raceway. Now, it is called tray cable, so you can install it inside of what's called a cable tray, which is under Article 392 of the National Electrical Code. Interesting enough, just little tidbits of information. Cable trays are not raceways. Now, there's a proposal to probably change that for the 2029 NEC. Boy, that's going to be weird. But right now, it's not a raceway. A cable tray is simply a supporting component, right? Just for supporting. It's not a raceway. So again, that sometimes confuses folks because you think the cables go inside of it, that it's a raceway, but it's not. So it's important when you're looking at different code rules and something says something about a raceway, realize that a cable tray is not a raceway. Anyway, so you can have tray cable in a raceway. Okay, so that would be like inside of PVC, Schedule 40, Schedule 80, could be inside of EMT, okay? But you do have to keep all those fill requirements in mind if it's a complete system. And we say complete system from box to box or from cabinet to box. If you're sleeving it in there, it's not prohibited. It's just going to be considered now as a single conductor, and you can't exceed 53% of the fill of that raceway. And again, you get that Chapter 9, Table 1, Note 9. All right, so what did we learn here? So it can go in a cable tray. Tray cable can go inside of a raceway. The next thing you'll notice that if your tray cable is marked for direct burial use, then it actually can go directly in the ground, right? Doesn't need to be in anything else. As long as you meet your depth of cover requirements in 300.5 for underground applications, then, and if it's direct burial right on it, boom, throw it right in the ground, okay? As long as you got your depth of cover, that's fine. Now that makes it very convenient. But here's the problem. The other application that you can use it for is to put it on a messenger. So a messenger is a supporting system like a wire or a guy wire from point A to point B, and then you have to support it from that wire. That's called a messenger. And there are manufacturers that actually make a tray cable with a supporting component wrapped around it that supports from a messenger. But the code just basically says you can do it on a messenger. And the messenger is going to support all that weight. Basically, just think it as a steel cable from point A to point B, like a trapeze, and you're hanging this cable from it. Code allows that. Now, the question that people ask me a lot is, if it's more robust and it's just like an SER, how come I can't run it on the side of a wall? Or how come I can't run it through a building by itself? And one is because the code doesn't let you, and I think it is the stupidest thing ever, and I'm the first to admit I have not been successful at getting the code panels to change their mind, and there's politicking reasons behind that, but I won't go into that. It's not worth it, and it doesn't matter. Why does it not matter to me? Because most people know that I'm the actual patent holder and inventor of what's called the hybrid cable. Now, I'm not here to stump you and sell you on the hybrid cable, but the reason I did it, most people that know me, the reason that I came up with it and patented it is because I got pissed off that politics were involved. And so if you can't beat them, you outsmart them, right? And it's that type of scenario. So what I did was I took a cable and I took all of the attributes of an SER, and I took, which you can run anywhere without being in a raceway inside of a building, right? And, you know, again, you have some building limitations because it is non-metallic and all that type of thing. So just be aware of different building construction types. But for generally, I could run it in a building without, any prohibited application. There are some, but again, that is commercial buildings and all that stuff, but I'm not going to get into the details. But generally, I could run, if it's a wood-framed 3-4 story multifamily building, I could run SCR all over the place and I'd be fine, right? But you can't run tray cable. But tray cable uses the exact same inners, right? And instead of it being 30 mils of sheathing, go! You know, instead of using 30 mils of sheathing, it's got 60 mils of sheathing. So you would think that it would be much more protected. So since the conductors are exactly the same, where's the harm? But again, you can't get code panel members, some of them, to, you know, because it's political reasons. So I'll leave it at that. And so I decided to create the hybrid. So it has both the tray cable attributes, even the direct burial attribute, right, which is based on UL 854, okay, and then it also picks up the SER attributes of 854 as well, and when it's tray cable, it picks up the 1277, and all of that is marked on the side of it. Now, what's the beautiful thing about that, and I'm just trying to give you the history here, is because I could run that like SER through the building, right? But then the moment that I transitioned outside and wanted to run down the side of the building, I couldn't do that with tray cable, right? But I can do that with SCR cable. Now, you still have to protect it from physical damage, and that's assuming you're an electrician and you understand that, and I'm assuming all of you do, unless you're on TikTok, and there's a select few that clearly don't. But if you run it down, then you go into the ground. With traditional SER, you'd have to change over to something, right? Or you'd have to use a more expensive option like PVC jacketed MC or something like that, right? So we like to give you options. We don't care what you use, but we want to give you options. So with a hybrid cable, you literally can transition from above ground straight to below ground, and then it becomes TCER, okay? Right? So you're able to go down, under, in the ground, and then back up at a separate building or separate structure, okay? That is unique because you never have been able to do that with an SE cable. In fact, in the code, it says it's for above ground applications. And if you look in the UL standard, it says that SE cables are for above ground. And we're not talking USE-2 or individual direct burial conductors. We're talking cables, okay? The service entrance cables with a jacketing over top of it, okay? Not to be confused. So anyway, I don't want to digress it, but this makes a product that kind of circumvents all of the things that they gave me grief about. So I said, you know what? I can play at that game. I literally came back from a meeting and said, you know what? Screw that. I'll create a product that can just circumvent all of that and gives you, the user, more options. And of course, you can only buy that product from one manufacturer because it is patented. And, so interesting about it is that it took me about 5 years to convince them that that was a necessary product. Because people would call us all the time and say, can I put SCR on the ground? Can I put SCR on the ground? And the answer to that is no, you can't, based on the standards, UL 854 as well as in the NEC. It says it very clearly, okay, in 338 for SC cable. So anyway, so you see the limitations on tray cable. Now, one thing about tray cable is the standard says it has to be round in nature. Now, the argument is, does it have to be perfectly round? Well, it almost does if you're going to put it in a hazardous location and you're going to use allowances in 501 or 502 in Division 2 where you can meet all the rules, because you have to seal it so that no gases can pass. Now, you might have a fitting that can make up the difference, like with O-rings or something that can make the difference when you compress it down onto the cable. But for the most part, we want it to be as round as possible. So what manufacturers do is they'll put in what's called fillers that fill those what's called interstices. So if you're not familiar with interstices, that's the little gaps or grooves or valleys that are created when you cable individual conductors together. Okay, they're called interstices. And you have to fill those voids in order to, otherwise it's going to be more of a diamond shaped, or it's going to be more of an oblong shape. It's not going to be round. Not an issue when you're using it generally everywhere else that's not a hazardous classified location. That's not an issue. But if you end up using tray cable in an application that does bring in that scenario where you have to worry about that sealing of the fitting to the cable, then you got to worry about that rounding. But normally, other than that, you don't need to worry about it. Now, getting back to the hybrid cable, the beautiful thing about my hybrid cable is that, here's the thing, it's difficult for people to find a nice assortment of sizes of tray cable connectors. I know they're out there, and I know different manufacturers make them, but it is difficult, and I can say that from experience, trying to help people find these products. The beautiful thing about the hybrid cable, and again, not a commercial for the hybrid, but I can always try to talk to people about it, is that when you're using it inside of the building as SER, even though it's dual rated, you get to use standard SER fittings. How about that? Standard connectors. As long as you're not using a connector where it's being used as tray cable, if you're using it where it's being used as SER, then you can use a standard SER fitting. Isn't that awesome? So it means that you get the best of both worlds. You can get it on a reel. You can roll it out the building, roll it down into the ground, roll it back up. This should be a perfect product for taking it to detached structures. You can lay individual USC-2 conductors like a URD or an RDC in the ground. But if you want that little extra level of protection, you're like, well, I don't believe in that. I want to run a raceway. Well, it is 60 mils, so you use the hybrid cable, boom, straight out, straight in, straight up, boom. Now, if you want to sleeve it in a raceway, remember I told you, tray cable is permitted. If you want to sleeve SCR for protection, it's totally permitted. So it simply keeps all your conductors together conveniently in one cable assembly, and you get the added protection of the extra thickness of the sheathing, right? That's a protective sheathing. It's not an insulation, it's a sheathing. So that's an important thing for you to remember about tray cable. Typically, normal tray cable, it's going to be the direct burial if it's marked as such. It can be run in a cable tray. It can be run hanging on a messenger. Now, to be in direct buried, it's got to say it on the side of it. So just make sure you're aware of that. I'll just look at the side of the cable. You'll be fine. And then it can be in a raceway. Nothing prohibits it from being in a raceway. Just remember, if it's a complete system from panel to panel or from panel to junction box, that means if the whole raceway has a connector on each end and it terminates into an enclosure or a box, that's considered a complete raceway. And then when you put a cable in there, you basically use the rules that are in Chapter 9, Table 1, Note 9, and you treat it like a conductor, a single conductor. And if you put a single conductor in a raceway, you can't exceed 53% of that raceway's fill, right? So you just do it the same way. You get all the information about the diameters from the manufacturer on their product sheets, and it's pretty easy to convert, right? It's so easy to do that if you know the diameter. You just take pi divided by 4, right? Pi divided by 4 times the diameter squared, and that'll give you your approximate area, and then you just treat it like it's a single conductor. Then you go to Chapter 9, and you go into Table 4, and you find out you go to the column for 53%, and make sure you don't exceed that and pick the right raceway that you need. Pretty straightforward stuff, but again, just a little bit. I wanted to give you a taste this morning about tray cable and answer that gentleman's question, and hopefully I gave you some insight on tray cable in different uses and applications, and I probably could have gone deeper explaining things like the ER and all that. ER, for example, people refer to that is differently. Some people refer to it extended run. Some people refer to it exposed run. It's really exposed run as it leaves a tray. You got a certain distance that you can go. All that's covered in 336. Maybe we'll talk about that on a different episode. Anyway, thanks, folks. Take care. God bless, and hopefully you get something out of it today and make your week a special week.